Hi, we're analysts from Indie Insights. I'm Richard Emery.
I'm Jack Stewart.
And I'm Michelle D'Angelo.
Today, we're going to be looking at what the Australian and Indian economies could learn from each other. First, we'll be looking at gross domestic product, foreign direct investment, and the World Inclusive Development Index.
I'll be looking at each country's economic policy, inflation, and consumer price index.
And I'll be looking at employment growth and the Consumer Confidence Index. And collectively, these indicators will be explored and examined so that insights can be obtained as to what lessons can be learned.
First, we'll look at the traditional economic indicator of gross domestic product. Before we start, it's important to understand the sheer size difference between the two economies. India's population of 1.3 billion dwarfs Australia's 25 million. Although a lot of the data researched and produced as part of this study looks at a per capita basis, there still needs to be some consideration for the population size. Also, in terms of international trade, Australia has been in the game since 1964. India, however, are relatively new, experiencing economic liberalisation in 1991. This liberalisation opened India up to the world and has seen the Indian economy grow at an astounding rate. Looking at GDP, it can be seen that Australia enjoys a much higher GDP per capita. However, the Indian GDP growth rate is much larger than Australia's. This shows that while Australia are in front, India are catching up fast. According to the World Bank, India is considered the 7th largest economy in the world based on GDP, with Australia coming in at 14th. It's important for Australia to understand what India are doing differently and apply it to their own economy. Initially, we expected India's growth to be purely a result of the cheap labour and size of the economy. However, we were surprised at the level of automation and the quality of services and business products during our visit. This was exemplified with the manufacture of BMW motorbikes at the domestic manufacturer TVS. These bikes are built for export to Germany. This not only demonstrates India's manufacturing competence, but its ability to develop and deliver a business model competitive on an international scale. Our research has shown that while India has a large portion of its GDP attributable to agriculture, the service sector is one of the fastest growing in the world, with a growth rate of 9% since 2001. The tour to Infosys was particularly interesting, with the sheer size of the facility being much larger than any Australian IT service company. The service sector is clearly an area where Australia has some room for improvement and will offer diversity against the exportation of finite natural resources. These are all contributing factors to India's preferable GDP performance. It was, however, also noted during the tour that there is some significant room for improvement in India in terms of infrastructure to support its current growth. While Australia's infrastructure is far from world class, India has a long way to go, and there are concerns this could be stifling India's growth. While this is something the Indian government appears to be working on, with the level of road development proclaimed by Modi and witnessed during our tour, the roads being built are well overdue and should already be in place to support the development of the economy, instead of restricting business access to the whole of India and in turn their ability to grow. In terms of infrastructure development, one of the main contributors to the development and economic prosperity of a country is its foreign direct investment. India has seen a significant growth in FDI according to the World Bank. This can be attributed to India's undertaking of the marketing campaigns such as Make in India campaign, which shows India has been focusing on FDI and understands its importance. It has been reported that the campaign has contributed as much as 48% increase in FDI, helping establish India as an attractive investment option for foreign investors. However, recent tax changes in India have contributed to the reduction of India's market capitalisation according to the Indian Economic Times. In this regard, India could learn something from Australia. While India are looking to remove the conscientious surcharge on foreign portfolio investors, it has already created uncertainty from an investment point of view regarding the stability of tax rates in the economy. This uncertainty does not sit well with investors. Australia, on the other hand, have a lower tax rate of 27.5% to 30% based on the size of the company, compared to India's 40%. They have also demonstrated almost 20 years of stability, with the corporate tax rate not changing since 2001. In addition, the Australian government communicate well in advance any changes to the corporate tax rate. This provides confidence for foreign investment. India need to focus on demonstrating stability to the international investment community in order to continue receiving the benefits of FDI. I'll now pass over to Jack, who's going to talk about economic policy and inflation.
Both India and Australia utilise a central reserve bank to implement monetary policy within their economy. The issuance of currency and management of interest rates are the primary tools these bodies use to achieve their economic goals. While the systems and targets are similar, there are notable differences between the two countries. India's economic policy is designed to maintain price stability while keeping in mind the objective of growth, compared to Australia's objective to contribute to the stability of the currency, full employment, and the economic prosperity and welfare of the Australian people. As a nation with high levels of poverty, India could learn from the social aspect of Australia's economic policy. By addressing the need for the Reserve Bank to prioritise the prosperity and welfare of its citizens, the scope of monetary policy broadens to include more holistic goals that benefit a larger contingent of the population. I'll explore the specific inflation targets set by each country and the flow-on effects of these in the next section. A country's consumer price index and subsequent inflation rate paint an important picture on the nation's cost of living over time and can indicate supply and demand related issues within an economy. Governments with a monopoly over the issuance of money have the power to affect inflation through fiscal policy that either dilutes or constricts a country's financial pool. Naturally, if inflation occurs at a higher rate than that of wage growth, living expenses take up a larger portion of an average individual's income. While India has experienced a period of strong GDP growth, it has in the past 10 years seen inflation of consumer prices as high as 12%. Research has shown that high inflation should unambiguously increase inequality, which is of particular relevance to India as one of the most unequal countries in the world. In 2014, the Modi government implemented a range of changes to export policy in an attempt to keep supply of agricultural products in the country and lower inflation. In 2016, the Indian government set an inflation target of 4%, plus or minus 2% for the first time. As can be seen in the World Bank's inflation graph, these measures were effective, although there have been fluctuations over the past 3 years and the government is still under scrutiny in relation to the country's consumer price index. Comparatively, Australia's inflation has been steady for an extended period of time, albeit at a lower rate than the Reserve Bank's target of 2 to 3% in recent years. Australia's inflation target was set in the early 1990s, which has given the country almost 3 decades of experience in managing fiscal policy with consumer price index in mind. India could learn from Australia's years of implementation by stocktaking which changes were most effective in raising or lowering inflation and how to manage the societal response. Furthermore, India's target range could be honed to establish stability and align closer to the globally recognised ideal rate of 2%. This would introduce benefits to the Indian economy by providing a climate that is more favourable to sound, sustained economic growth and job creation. Looking at the World Bank's Consumer Price Index statistics, it becomes apparent that India's CPI has grown substantially over the past 10 years, and if that growth continues, it could put a strain on household budgets. A refined inflation target would be a positive step in addressing this issue. Wage growth must also be considered when assessing the impact of inflation on an economy. Although available data is vague, Indian per capita income growth has been reported at between 5 and 8% from 2014 to 2018 by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. According to the International Labour Organization, India was one of the countries leading the way in real wage growth between 2006 and 2017. Conversely, Australia has been stagnant in this field since 2013. Australia could learn from India's strong performance and has the potential to benefit by introducing fiscal policy targeting underemployment to ensure real wage growth is lifted in the coming years. I'll now hand over to Michelle, who will analyse the employment and consumer confidence within the two economies.
Let's have a look at employment and consumer confidence and see how both countries shape up. High and steady employment is a major indicator of economic growth and development. Australia currently enjoys an employment rate of 62.6%, which has held steady throughout this year. Unemployment in Australia currently sits at 5.2%, which has gently declined since 2014. Unfortunately, information on employment in India varies and is often reported in an unhelpful manner, such as urban versus rural or state by state, which doesn't really tell us much. In May 2019, India's unemployment was reported at a staggering high of 7.17%, noting it's upticked since 2018, where levels hovered around the 6% mark. So what does the future look like with respect to employment? The Australian government claims total employment in Australia will increase by 7.1% by May 2023. This is attributable to steady growth in 17 of the major sectors and projections that female employment is expected to grow by 8.8% compared to 5.6% for males. India, on the other hand, does not enjoy the same projected employment growth, despite a booming economy and increasing labour force. Oxfam India believes this is because of the inequality and discrimination in Indian society and culture and the unequal distribution of income and wealth. Can you believe only 25% of Indian women are in the workforce, rendering it one of the lowest in the world, the lowest being Bangladesh? And on average, women are paid 34% less than similarly qualified male workers. Absolutely staggering. Youth unemployment in India of 23.7% continues to present a serious challenge compared to Australia's 11.9%. This may be because of India's young population, where the average age is 29, but nevertheless, it indicates an underlying and systemic issue. Other major issues for India on the employment front are increase of casual and contract-based employment, meaning no job security and less pay, lack of social security, especially for women who leave the workforce to care for children, low wages and a lack of employment conditions to protect workers, social inequalities such as gender, caste, religion, education and family structure, lack of reliable and consistent data, and finally, what the analysts call dislocation between growing GDP and wage growth, thereby creating income inequality. We think that India could learn the following lessons from Australia to address these fundamental issues. Shift the focus on labour-intensive and high-demand sectors to create jobs and ensure those jobs are decent and secure. It is important to make wholesale standardisation, centralisation and legislation of better employment conditions, including minimum wages, taxation and fundamental employment rights to eliminate inequality. Currently, these don't exist. Affirmative action and positive discrimination initiatives to increase, for example, the participation of women in the workforce, and progressive taxation to reduce focus on corporate tax exemptions. The extra revenue generated from these measures can be invested in social welfare, health and education. Let's have a look at Consumer Confidence Index, or the CCI. So CCI, as we all know, measures how optimistic or pessimistic consumers are about the economy in the immediate future. In Australia, consumer confidence increased to 100 points in August, and it appears that Australia are more upbeat following the federal election, interest rate cuts, and renewed buoyancy in the property market. But despite this, the consumer confidence is down from 2018 and appears to have sawtoothed. India's consumer confidence has come off considerably since March 2019, presumably following the election in May, where consumers say they have failed to see election promises come to fruition. India's consumer confidence is generally lower than Australia's and appears to be declining. It therefore appears consumers from both countries are adopting a wait-and-see approach. The key lessons here for both governments is that they should be focusing on consumer confidence before, during and after elections to ensure economic confidence remains positive. Interestingly, a similar story can be told in relation to business confidence in both countries. As can be seen on both graphs, business confidence appears to have spiked prior to the election and somewhat slipped post-election. So in summary, India has a long way to go in terms of turning employment growth around and can certainly learn a lot from Australia's success in this space. Consumer and business confidence has dipped for both countries since the election, and the focus needs to be on maintaining confidence before, during and after an election to give the economy some positive stimulus. Back to the team.
One of the other interesting aspects of our tour in India was the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. While we were fortunate enough to stay in a nice hotel, there were people in the streets outside that did not have food to eat, which led us to wonder how India performs on the World Economic Forum's Inclusive Development Index. While Australia came in 9th in the 2018 rankings for advanced economies, India came in 62nd on the emerging economies. The Inclusive Development Index can be considered a more holistic evaluation of economic progress. Instead of monitoring just GDP, inflation and CPI, the Inclusive Development Index looks at 15 areas of economic policy and performance that have both economic growth but also wider social benefits associated. Some of these factors include the poverty rate under inclusion and average net savings under intergenerational equity and sustainability. The intent is to provide a more realistic picture of how an economy is performing, which includes societal aspects that are not normally represented with traditional macroeconomic indicators. The report supported what was witnessed during our tour, that there is scope for improvement across India in terms of poverty, with 6 out of 10 Indians living on less than $3.20 per day. The redistribution of wealth will be something to watch as the relatively young population come of age, while the economy is undergoing significant change. India performed well in labour productivity, GDP, and showed an increase in life expectancy up to 59.5 years. Australia performed well in terms of wealth equality and employment, as mentioned by Michelle. There appears to be room for improvement in terms of income equality, with Australia coming 22nd out of 30 advanced economies. Although Australia performed relatively poorly in terms of income equality, there was still much better than India. On an interesting note, India performed better in terms of public debt. All these facts and figures are interesting, but what do they mean? And more importantly, what can each country learn from each other? Clearly, India needs to focus on improvements to income and wealth distribution in a bid to reduce the country's poverty. This should also have the added benefits of increases in productivity and higher rates of employment. While employment growth has slowed, this figure is being compared against 20 years of strong economic growth resulting from the liberalisation of India's international trade policy. So the bar is quite high in India. Australia needs to follow India's lead in terms of employment growth and focus on reduction of public debt. Let's unpack some of the findings from our research. India could learn from a more even distribution of wealth. This would provide a focus on elimination of poverty, job growth, and further development for the economy. They also need to focus on a more stable environment for foreign direct investment. This will help to attract infrastructure projects to the country. Australia needs to develop industries outside of exportation of fossil fuels and agriculture. Possibly this could be in a service industry, in a similar way to India. They also need to ensure the government focus on debt reduction. What about you, Jack?
Thanks, Richard. In addition to these points, we also uncovered that India could be served well by considering Australia's welfare-based economic policy, specifically by targeting the prosperity of all Indian citizens through monetary objectives. India also could learn from Australia's decades of inflation management to encourage stable growth, while Australia could learn from India's strong real wage growth by implementing policy to tackle underemployment within the country.
Thanks, Jack. That's very interesting. So clearly India has a long way to go to address its unemployment problem, which is endemic within the country. Specifically, the fundamental and inherent discrimination and inequality that underpins Indian society needs to be addressed if they want to get ahead of the game and tackle unemployment. Specifically, we need to start looking at low wages. They need to start looking at job security, increasing female participation in the workforce, and getting a war on the youth unemployment problem. These are issues that need to be tackled in order for the unemployment situation to improve. In terms of consumer confidence, it is clear that business and consumer confidence has dipped since the elections in May this year. We believe that to address this issue, the governments need to focus on consumer confidence not only before the election, but during and after, to ensure that people remain optimistic and positive about the economy so that it can be stimulated. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Michelle. That concludes our findings on what the Australian and Indian economies could learn from each other. Thanks for watching.